Hello and welcome to Computer Retro Bus. In today's episode we are going back in time, back to the year 2003, when we have two giants of the GPU wars deep in battle. On one side we have NVIDIA, on the other we have ATI, pre-AMD buyout of course. This was when the GPU wars were at its peak. They were actually really quite close. NVIDIA wasn't completely dominant like it is today. ATI had just released the 9000 series and NVIDIA the GeForce FX. So we're going to compare two cards of that era, mid-range cards that most of us probably would have been able to afford back then, and see how they compare. And yes, I know you've noticed we're running Windows 2000 rather than Windows XP. I just have such a soft spot for Windows 2000. I started running it obviously because it came out before Windows XP and it was just such a stable operating system. So it's always got a soft spot in my heart. So we're going to have all our benchmarks on Windows 2000. So let's start off by looking at our base system specs. Okay, so we have a Pentium 4 Prescott core running at 3.4 gigahertz, pretty good. 800 FSB, this is a really fast CPU for this era. Our main board is an Asus P5P800, and in memory we have 2 gigabytes of DDR running at 800 megahertz all up.
Okay, from the GeForce side we have the FX 5600. This is a card from Albitron, which was a pretty popular brand back in the day, but I don't think they're around anymore. This particular card has 256 meg of RAM. On the ATI side we have the Radeon 9500 Pro. So this card that I have here has 128 megs of RAM, and you'll notice that it was actually released in November 2002, so that's 5 months before the GeForce FX, which was released in March 2003. Okay, and now moving on to some benchmarks. Let's start with 3D Mark 2001. Right away we can see quite a little bit of a lead on the ATI, not quite a lot, but a bit. This is on the higher details one, but when you go to the lower detail it becomes a really significant difference. You can see some of those frames are in the mid 200s on the ATI on this one. Moving on to, again, the lower detail ones, you see the much bigger gap. You're seeing the ATI hit the 170 frames per second on this one. The NVIDIA is, yeah, it cracks 100, but it's mostly under. But when we go to the higher detail, you can see it's a little bit closer. Going on to the nature, it's again, this one's a bit more closer as well. I suspect it's the pixel shaders on the NVIDIA that are helping it boost to keep up a little bit closer on the nature. But looking at the overall marks, we can see that the ATI did win by a significant margin. It's got 10,933 points against the NVIDIA GeForce FX at 8,923. Now moving on to 3D Mark 2003. Starting off, they look pretty neck and neck in this first test. They look pretty close. The ATI is slightly ahead, but it's nothing too dramatic. Onto the next test. This one's a really tough test. The ATI is a bit more ahead here. You can see because the frames are dropping down to single digits, you can sort of see, especially this fantasy one, as the test goes on, it becomes even more dramatic for the ATI. And in the nature one especially, the frame rates just jump up to 200-300% faster on the ATI. The NVIDIA GeForce FX really drags down to the single frames, quite a lot of that. Looking at the pixel shader, which I thought the GeForce might have done better, it appears I was a bit wrong, because looking at this test, the ATI absolutely destroys the GeForce FX. Again, 4 or 5 times the frame rate. So looking at the final scores, we have ATI clearly in the lead with 2,785 points compared to the NVIDIA's 1,794. That's a 43% increase. That's unbelievable. Now moving on to some gaming benchmarks to get a real-world experience of how these cards perform. Running the Quake III timedemo, we can see the results here. The ATI has 270 frames versus the NVIDIA's 247. So that's only an 8% difference, which is not too bad considering the big gap we saw in the 3D Mark. Next we have Unreal Tournament 2003 and its built-in benchmarking tool. straight away you can see on this fly through that real stutter on that GeForce FX when it does a environmental fly through. Then it also does a bot match. The bot match seems to be okay. It looks alright, but I've always noticed it tends to be a bit laggy in the sense that the video was always getting left behind in the GeForce FX. And we can see that the NVIDIA did the flyby in 97 frames per second and the bot match in 59, with the ATI going at 102 for the flyby and 65 for the bot match. So again, a difference of about 8 or 9% going ATI's way. Next we're moving on to Need for Speed Underground. Now I've got some interesting results here. The ATI seemed to be locked at 60 and it wouldn't go above 60, but it did sort of flutter around certain parts. The NVIDIA on the other hand was locked at 30 and it just would not go over 30. I tried multiple different drivers and 30 was the max I got. It rarely seemed to dip below it, but yeah, I'm not sure what was going on with that. If it's a setting, if I was doing something wrong, post it in the comments. But yeah, this is the results I got for both these cards. Our last benchmark is Far Cry, but you got to see what happened once I loaded Far Cry onto the GeForce FX 5600. I started seeing these crazy artifacts all over the place. This was absolutely nuts. I just couldn't figure out what was happening. I thought maybe the card had overheated. So I checked that, but it wasn't. The heatsink was still pretty cool. I tried turning the machine off, just restarting it. Nah, no good. Just nothing would fix it. So I thought, you know what? Last thing I could try is just try a different set of drivers. So I went and downloaded the latest version that was released for the FX 5600. Now with both cards working properly, we could really compare the two and you can really see quite a difference here. The ATI is looking much better. It's always in the mid to high 20s. It never drops below 20. The NVIDIA on the other hand rarely touches 20 or goes over, and if it does it's just a 21. So it's quite a significant difference. It's the ATI is much smoother, much more playable, from mid 20 to 30 frames per second. Okay, the last thing I wanted to try was actually, since I had loaded the new drivers on, to actually compare, because everyone would say, use the earlier drivers, use version 45.23 for the FX, it's the best. But I thought, yeah, is it true? I mean, drivers usually get better, right? And find more efficiencies. Well, clearly it's not the case, because look at this difference, it's insane. So the driver version 93.81 had a penalty of more than 1,000 points in 3D Mark. So yeah, it really killed the performance compared to the much earlier driver. This was such an amazing time during the GPU wars. I remember really wondering, is ATI going to be the next big one? Because NVIDIA had just taken out 3DFX a couple of years earlier and ATI were sort of keeping up with them, and then in this generation they came out really strong and they really worried NVIDIA. If you notice in that generation, NVIDIA released so many cards. They just kept bringing out bigger cards with more higher clock speeds, higher memory, bigger heat sinks. They were really fighting tooth and nail to try and get that crown back.
Thanks for watching this episode. I hope you liked it. If you did, give me a like. And also add some comments about some of the fond memories that you have of those days. But yeah, thanks for watching again and hope to see you in the next one.